ज़माना बुलंदतर सलावात।
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا بالقاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أما بعد، قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Recital salawat, please.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Our series of discussions are coming into its fourth night. As we've been discussing so far, this month of Muharram is a month of Rahmah, mercy. And mercy is something which is required for all of us. This world in and of itself lacks mercy. So you have a tradition that says that Allah is the most merciful, only shines 1% of His mercy in this world. And for that reason, in essence, this is hell. There is no other hell than this. Why is that? Because hell is a place where mercy is restricted, and the world as you see it today is restricted with mercy. For that purpose, you'll find that the physical world enchants you, but it doesn't fulfill you. Look at the verses of the Quran, you'll see. Allah has to beautify, you could say, or in the verses of the Quran, you find shaitan beautifies, such that then you have hubbu shahawat, for example, or gold, silver, worldly things. So that tells you that there has to be a beautification in and of itself. This world isn't beautiful. And for those people who realize that very early on, they come to realize how to truly get to fulfillment. The more mercy a person has, the more fulfilled they are, the more nurani they are, the more they come to understand Allah. The less mercy you have, the more you go towards darkness. And so this is why everything in creation has mercy in it, including shaitan. Had shaitan not had Rahmaniya in him, he wouldn't be shaitan. He'd be oblivious. There would be nothing there. Into oblivion he'd be cast. Every creature in creation has some elements of mercy. It's just the fact that some have more, some have less. The greatest tyrants of the world have less, and the greatest humanitarians may have more. But the fact is that it's always mercy, either a little or a lot. And mercy equates back to light, nur, as we've been discussing. Because Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Allahumma inni as'aluka bi rahmatika allati wasa'at kulla shay, it means even shaitan, even hell. Everything has some mercy which brings it into existence. Mercy is required, therefore. But just remember this, it's about intensifying that mercy. So what do? Look, everything has it. Let me say water, right? If you see water, for example, because everything is to do with the names. If you go back to what Allah says to the angels, He points them towards Adam and he says, he'll teach you the names. Why? Because we've given him all the names. Asma kullaha. There's all of the names. What are the names? The names of Allah are the combinations of creation. That every single ant and atom in creation is made up through combination of names. I'll give you an example. Water. Water's Ar-Rahman. When you look at it, when an Arif looks at water, they see Ar-Rahman, Al-Latif, Al-Hay, when they look at water. Why? Because it's Latif. It gives life and it has mercy in it. If you look at Shaitan, immediately what do you see? Azizul Jabbar al-Mutakabbir and Rahman. Little Rahman they may be, but there's still something there. Because everything in creation contains mercy, you then come to understand the reality of the Prophet who's Rahmat lil Alameen. Inside of the Prophet is contained the reality of all of creation. When he looks at Shaitan, he knows the Kamal of Shaitan. When he looks at the tree, he knows the Kamal of the tree. When he looks at Ibrahim, he knows the Kamal of Ibrahim. When he looks at the sun, he knows the Kamal of the sun. What is the Prophet? The Prophet is the entire universe in one body. And this is where the Prophet says, Ana wa alim and nur and wahid. What is this nur and wahid? Because nur can never be divided. It is only one. It's one mercy. The first element that Allah created, that first DNA, is known as Muhammad wa Ali. The outer was Risala and the batin was Wilaya. Both of these two names of Allah, Muhammad and Ali, both of these two names are in fact the reality of al-Zahir and Batin and Awwal and Akhir. But the fact is this, it begins on the haqiqat of the Prophet and it ends on the haqiqat of the Prophet. So based upon that, what is Imam Hussein therefore? Imam Hussein is that key that accelerates the mercy of Allah coming to you. And this is why these 10 days are important. Because remember one thing, when you fall into the world, what comes with the world? You become lost in the world. You're running from morning to evening working. It's not bad to work. It's bad to lose track of where you're actually going. You see, work is just a tool. You go to the gym. It's important. Sixth Imam says, divide your life into 4 parts. Imam says, otherwise you're jahil. Ignorant is the person who doesn't. If you're working the whole day, you're jahil. If you're reading the whole day, you're jahil. Why? Because Imam says you need to divide your life into 4 parts. Now, that doesn't mean you 20% or 25% or otherwise. It means no, even if it's for 5 minutes, but you've got to divide it. So if a person's working the whole day, what are they doing? Jahala. So it says, divide your life into 4 parts. What is the one? If you're a student, study. If you're working, work. But also in your daytime, just remember, at least take 10 minutes out for Allah. I'm not saying take out 2 hours. Even if it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes, but take that time out for Allah. And then here, the Imam continues and he says, then go and reconcile with people as well. Your family, Silatul Rahim is important. If you want to know how to increase your length of life, Silatul Rahim. Because believe me, without Silatul Rahim, you find that problems befall you. And we'll look at it in a minute because we're going to look at how to restrict mercy. Look, we haven't even finished Shaitan yet in the last 3 days we've been discussing. Imagine if we can't finish Shaitan in 3 days, Hussein ibn Ali until the day of judgment is going to carry on. Honestly. So, imagine this. One section of your life, Silatul Rahim. In fact, the Imam goes further and says, look, take a portion of your life for yourself. Go and relax. Or as you guys say, chillax. Go to the gym. Go for a jog. Take some time out for yourself. If you're not, you're going to get stressed. Imam is giving you the formula of life. What is it? Take time out for yourself, but also go and visit your family. There's a peace in that when you visit your mother, when you visit your father, when you visit your children. And remember, many a time we look at it, parents. Remember this. Aqd walidain is there. But we still have in the hadith, aqd of awlad is there as well, that people don't emphasize. That if a person breaks the heart of their children, it's possible that Allah brings adhab on those parents as well. So it's a two-way streak. We look at it on the side. We've got to also look at it on the other side. But look, these are chapters that we're going to open up, and to bring them all back together again is going to be difficult. So what I'm going to do is to stick on this point that look, shaitan is darkness and density. Why does Allah separate him? Because Allah knows it's unjust that light and darkness can't live side by side. But the formula here is this, that a person of darkness can travel to areas of light and understand those areas. But the fact is, because the wujud isn't accepting, they go back to where they are. And shaitan is increasing in darkness. Shaitan has to get to his perfection. Imagine how dense his wujud is that it takes until yawmul ma'aloom for him to die. People die when they're complete, basically. If you have a natural life, in the words of Mullah Sadra, basically, when you're complete and ready to go, you go. Shaitan's wujud is so dense, it takes until yawmul ma'aloom. But then just remember, that shaitan in the time of the Prophet is worse today because he's had 1400 years of evolution. And shaitan doesn't stop. Quran says, Uduwwun mubin. He's your open enemy. And he's not stopping, he's evolving. He knows you better than you know yourself. Because as we said, on the second day, if you remember, where does shaitan attack from? What did he say to Allah? He says, I'll come from the back and the front and the side, left and the right. I'm going to attack them. But the first place he attacks us from the back. And as we said, back is your fears. And this is how he got into Adam's psyche at the very beginning. Now look, Adam didn't commit a mistake. But what he did was, if you look at it, and this is where, in fact, now that we're on this, we'll carry on. This is where you find that when Nuh alayhi salam, after the entire Ark of Nuh incident takes place, shaitan comes to him. He says, listen, I want to thank you. You did me a huge favor. He said, what was it? Because you wiped these guys out. And even shaitan is a businessman, right? He looks at it and says, all of these people were, you could say, going towards hell anyway. But imagine shaitan having to organize all of these people. In one go, Nuh's dua wiped them all out. He says, you did me a favor. You wiped all of them out. I don't need to worry about them anymore. But remember, even shaitan knows, Al-Jaza al-Ahsani illa al-Ahsan. He says, I'm going to do ahsan on you. I'm going to give you some advice so that you remember this. And believe me, there are times you find that sometimes shaitan comes to certain people and he gives them advice. We have in tradition, some Urafa, for example, shaitan comes, he says, don't sit like this, sit like this. They say, why? He says, this is Tawheed. Remember, shaitan understands Alim al-Nur. Look at the words that he uses in the Quran. When he addresses Allah with Rabb, he understands Rububiyyah. There are places, you see, when you want something, you go through Rububiyyah. And when you're looking at Itlaq, and you're looking at kind of that higher level, you go through Uluhiyyah. So anyhow, shaitan understands the names, which most of us don't. And the entire game of Irfan is to do with the names. Because he's seen Alim al-Nur, right? He's seen the angels. He was with the Malaika. He was raised to that maqam, though he wasn't worthy, but he still saw it. The difference was this. He knows it theoretically. It hasn't actualized yet. How many people are there in the world? Theoretically, they could be the best of mujtahids for argument's sake. But until it doesn't get in there, they can never become Salman. It has to come from the heart. So shaitan theoretically understands. He knows, I know how to get to Allah. And he did. He used the names and Allah says, fine, what do you want? I want this. He says, take it. So then what happens? Incident of Nuh takes place. Shaitan comes. He says, I want to give you some advice. 3 things I'll mention now so that you can understand. Shaitan says, listen, make sure that these 3 things you're not doing, otherwise I'm going to attack you. I'm going to rip you apart. So Nuh says, Gom, what are these 3 things? He says, remember one thing. My biggest falling, the way that I destroyed myself, was because I had takabbur. The first sin on earth, kibr. Do not ever be a person of takabbur, because I'm going to attack you. And I'm going to attack you in 2 ways. I'm going to come from the back, and because of your fears, you're going to find yourself arrogant in front of other people. And you see that sometimes when you feel insecure with certain people, all of a sudden your head goes up, your chest comes out, you become arrogant in front of them. And at the same time, what else? He says, and I'm going to attack them in their deen, because I'm going to make sure that they're at the front. When the Salatul Jum'ah is, or for example, when the Jama'at is. And I'm going to make sure that I infiltrate their deeds, so that I destroy their deeds. And this is why if you look at it, some of the Urafa say that there are 2 ways to Allah. One way is through ibadah, but that way is a dangerous way because shaitan comes in, infiltrates. So you get a guy's wudu, half an hour later it's still rubbing the same place. Going like, doing wudu. Brother, your beard's not that long, it's there. Rubbing away, rubbing away. Oh, look at him. Doesn't have a beard. Look at him. That's not there. This is happening. That's happening. Let's look at ourselves first. What do we have? What do we don't have? You see, this is the thing. As they say in the wadi of ishq, you suspend judgment. You leave it to Allah. Yes, amr bil ma'ruf is there, but first apply it on yourself. What does Imam Ali alayhi salam say? Same thing with Jesus. Okay, if you've committed no sins, take the stone and cast it. Everybody looks at themselves and says, no, we're all sinners. Says, fine. Who's left? Ali, Hassan, Hussein, alayhi salam. Look, let me tell you one thing that I always look at it in this way. Ahlul Bayt are forgiving. The day that you criticize people, you marginalize them. If you truly have pain in your heart for Islam, don't marginalize people. Don't push them away. We're meant to bring people to Islam. And many a time, because of our actions, we chuck people away from Islam. Now, I still remember one time somebody came and said, you shouldn't let him into the mosque. I said, why? He said, don't you know he drinks? I said, so what? The day I stop him from coming into a place which is mansoob to rahmat lil alameen is the day that I myself leave this pathway. Rasulullah is there and his mission is there. Who knows who can come and do tawbah? It's possible he's going to get forgiven before I am. The problem is we judge, and then what happens? That judgment leads to our community splitting, because immediately Allah brings adhab down. You see? Why does adhab come down? Why does community splinter? Because we forget mercy, which in this day and age is even more important than it was before. There needs to be mercy and compassion. If you want to guide somebody, always look at it objectively, never through your emotions. It is all of our responsibility to bring people back to the way of wilayah. To bring people back to the way of wilayah requires compassion of Hussein. If Hussein turned around to Hur and said, get lost, there would be no Karbala today in the way that it is. Imam Hussein wouldn't be remembered as Rahmatullah al-Wasi'. The fact that Imam Hussein's Rahmatullah al-Wasi' means what? It means there's a compassion. We've got to implement it ourselves. When we implement it ourselves, then Allah brings compassion into your life immediately. Every move is going to be there. Angels say, Allah, but he's a sinner. He says, but no, he showed compassion to my beings. He was there to help them. These stories of the Imams are not there, just there for stories. There's a haqiqah behind this. Implement them. So no, let's go back. What do we say? Shaitan gives 3 advices. First one, he says, firstly, remember, kibr. Secondly, he continues. And he says, and look at the angels. What do you find in the angels? This level of self-contentment, really, right? In fact, in a tradition, Shaitan turns around and says, there was another downfall of mine. Second point was what? Jealousy. Kibr, arrogance, coupled with jealousy. Where do we see that? Jealousy destroys families and communities. I'll give you an example. MashaAllah, he has such a nice car. God forbid he crashes it. Then what happens? Internally, you feel happy. Externally, oh, sorry, brother, you crashed your car. Why? Because he shouldn't be driving a BMW or a Mercedes. I should be driving one. His children shouldn't be succeeding. My children should be succeeding. You forget, what does Allah say? Rizq is in the hands of Allah. Wallahu khayrul raziqeen. Allah has given rizq to everyone. But the best of rizq is in the majlis of Imam Hussein. And that rizq of tonight, will never come back. For everyone who's in this majlis, there's a special rizq which will not be there tomorrow and will not be there again until the day of judgment. This is why these 10 nights utilize it. I know some of you may have work, others may have school, But make sure that when the time of Majlis of Imam Hussein comes, there's a special risk which will never come back. Again, first 10 days it comes from Allah. And this is why we say even if you miss it, then that's it. Next year a new risk comes. But this ma'nawi risk that's meant to come leaves you forever. So these are the secrets that you need to utilize this. Now let's develop it forward. Then what does he say? He says, and when it came to Adam, Adam was haris. Why? He says, because Adam inside of him had a fear. What was that fear? Adam didn't want to be chucked out of heaven. He wanted to remain there in the worldly heaven, which was. He had a fear. So I exploited that fear through Hawa. I exploited it. Why? Because remember, Adam, or when I say Adam here, human beings, Shaitan hits you from the waham. This is why you may have heard. This is your waham. This is waham. That's waham. Shaitan hits you from waham. And in fact, when you notice, you'll see, when you commit, God forbid, a sin, you think it's coming from you. After you've committed it, you realize, actually, I shouldn't have done that. All of a sudden, it separates from you. Because the idea is not yours. The idea is Shaitan's. Shaitan's put it in. He's mixed it in with your mind. But it's not meant to be part of your mind. It's your waham. That's how Shaitan infiltrates. But remember what Allah said. He says, maybe you're able to infiltrate their waham, but you cannot infiltrate their heart. If you give this heart towards the Imam, then you'll see that this heart's nur always takes over. This is why the hadith says, when Allah favors somebody, He puts a dot of nur in their heart. What does that nur have? It has two proponents to that nur. One is this, that the ishq of Hussein increases in a person's heart, and secondly, the ishq of the ziyar of Hussein increases in their heart. Ishq of ziyara increases in their heart. Can you just tweak up the side of salawat, please? Slightly around. Slightly around. Just bring it around this way. Not the other way. To me. Nice. Another salawat, please. You can imagine, I'm from a cold country. It's humid outside, and I think the AC stopped working in here. Recite another salawat, please. So what does Shaitan do? Hits that wham. What's our responsibility, therefore? Ingrain in yourself nur. Now, the other side is also important. When Allah dislikes somebody, you could be a millionaire, but what happens? No Arbain, no Ashura, no 15th of Sha'ban, no 13th of Rajab. There's people who have a lot of money, but there's not in their naseeb ever to go. But when you get to Karbala on Arbain Day, you and I both know, there are people over there who may be the poorest in society. You don't know how they've come all the way from the United States flown over when their income is less than the ticket. And somehow every single year you find them, and not only do you find them, but they're doing service for the Zawar of Hussein. That is known as tawfiq, and that is known as barakah. Now look, I said yesterday I'll explain the concept of barakah. But before I open up that bab, let's finish this bab off. Nur, therefore, as it expands in the heart. Now remember, this is the only thing that's whole. Have you seen old people? They begin to lose their recollection sometimes. And the Quran says as well, that when a person becomes older, what happens? Sometimes you notice that their memory begins to go. When you get into your qabr, all of your memory goes, wiped. So if your tawheed and your ishq of Imam Hussein is talqini or taqlidi, it's gone. What it needs to be, nevertheless, is nuri. And how do we do that? This is where we do that. Now look, let me tell you something. Maybe you can, as you sit here right now, look into your own heart and see. Can you see Karbala in your heart? That Karbala which is resting in your heart, and that Imam Hussein that's within your heart that you're connecting to, this connection, direct connection, because remember the hadith says, haram of Imam Hussein, the dhari' of Imam Hussein is not actually in Karbala. It is, yes, physical, but actually it rests in your heart. And as you're here, think and understand that you are in the presence of Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. Now imagine if all of you sitting here, which is a lot of you guys, all of you who are here have that same awareness, and you look into your heart and you see Imam Hussein, believe me, there's no dua that shouldn't be answered, because the hadith says if 40 good people pray, Allah accepts the dua. At this moment in time, whether you're good or you're bad, in the eyes of Allah, all of you are azadar. And azadar have their own maqam. So now what do we do here? It's important to pray for each other. Why? Because Fatima alayhi salam taught us that. Just remember this. Everything is in hadith. Everything is in the seerah of the Aimma. Zahra alayhi salam teaches, first pray for other people. In the words of Ayatollah Bahjat, it says if you pray for other people, the malaika pray for you. What are you worried about yourself for? Majlis of Hussein? 70,000 malaika that are coming down? Why don't you pray for other people? Pray for the person next to you who might be in pain. Pray for the person next to you who may have a problem with their health. Pray for the person next to you who might have financial difficulties. Pray for the person next to you, but remember one thing, in the time of ghaibah, the most important thing is showing mercy to each other. As the hadith says, when times of difficulty come, look outside and see. Time of inflation, austerity, issues there. Show compassion to one another, so Allah removes difficulty and hurdles from your life. The secret is that. If you look at those people who survive today, even in times of difficulty, what do? The words of Imam Ali alayhi salam, Mawla, I'm poor, give sadaqah. But Mawla, I'm poor, or give more sadaqah. But Mawla, I don't have any money. No, you don't realize. You don't realize. When you challenge Allah to say, Allah, you said you're going to give my rizq. I'm going to give in your way. Now you give in my way. See what Allah does. Can you do that? Do you have the ability to do that? Remember, you all know it, so it's taqlidi. If it's nuri, you can do it. There's a difference. Taqlidi, you know it. You know lying is haram. Some people may still lie. You know Allah's raziq. And Allah said, when you go through financial difficulties, give. And if you're rich, then give more. So Allah gives you more. There's a very famous relative of the Prophet, whose name is Abdullah bin Ja'far, who's the husband of Sayyidah Zainab. Look how rich he was. Why? Because he also knew how to give. Secrets are there. You don't need a special amal for Allah to give you money. Quran tells you automatically, help my creation, I'll automatically give you what you want. Give it a try. What's the worst that can happen? If anything, give it a try. At least once. See what happens. Allah's raziq. So look, coming forward. When we talk about mercy, and one eye is on the clock. If Allah is merciful, of course. If there's barakah in our time, I'll be able to compile all of this in the next 20 minutes, 15 minutes or so. See, mercy begins at home. Remember this. Mercy begins at home. I want to give you a story, right? In the time of the Bani Israel, Allah sent adhab to the people. When adhab came, the first thing He did, the crops died. The rizq was constricted. Crops died, droughts. Kind of reminds me of the world today. Grain prices went up. Automatically, when Allah does this, it means that adhab is coming down. There's not in a signboard to say, I'm sending adhab down. That doesn't happen anymore. What does He do? Crops dry up. Energy prices rise. Inflation rises. All of these things happen. Then when that happened, the hadith says, it says, and immediately Allah brought a pandemic on the people. So the hadith says now they're in their houses and they can't even come out. So they had a lockdown, like we did. And they kept their windows open. And what they did was they were helping each other through the windows. So there was a prophet at the time. Wahi comes. He says, my prophet, tell the people, I'm going to remove all the bala that's coming. He says, why Allah? He says, because even in this time of trial and tribulation, your community helped one another. Helped one another. Now look, that's the message for us. As you know, in the next year or so, economic crisis and so forth is just going to get worse. This is just the beginning, right? We all know this. It's how you help each other get through this, which is the most important. One thing. Second thing is this. There was a very, very big alim by the name of Sheikh Murtaza Zahid. He's one of the Urafa of the 20th century. One of those people who was connected to the 12th Imam. And there's very few people who actually can joke with the 12th Imam. So you find that some people actually joke with them, and Imam jokes with them, because they have that relationship. Not everybody can. Sheikh Murtaza Zahid used to live in Tehran. One day, like we do, he went to a mahfil, and the mahfil took a bit longer. So as he was coming back, he thought, oh my God, my wife is going to be sleeping, and I'm coming back late. Now what would you and I do? Press the doorbell, we didn't have the key, and she'd come running down with her eyes red. What did he do? There's a difference between them, and there's a difference between us. There's a difference between a person who Imam al-Zaman comes and does ziyarah of, and there's a difference between a person trying to get to the Imam. It was winter time. It was -1. Sheikh Murtaza Zahid sits outside of his door, puts his abba and says, I was late. What's she done that I disturb her sleep? What's she done that I've disturbed her sleep? Sits down next to the door, puts his abba over his head. She was sleeping. In the middle of her sleep, the 12th Imam alayhi salam comes, says, get up. Murtaza Zahid is sleeping outside of your door. She gets up, she comes downstairs, she opens the door. He looks up, says, how did you know? She said, Imam al-Zaman alayhi salam just came into my dream and said to open the door. What does that mean? That's showing mercy on your family, right? That's showing mercy on your family members. This is what's important. We got to start off from there first. Mercy begins from the home. Mercy begins with our children. Mercy begins with our parents. So now let's look at this. When it comes to parents, you know what Ayatollah Bahauddini says? The great marja, Ayatollah Bahauddini. That one who would go to graves, he would sit there for a long time. People said, oh, why? He says, because I can see the adhab of their qabr, I'm doing dua to alleviate it. Ayatollah Bahauddini. It's a famous name. Most of you probably know him. Now remember, there's much you can gain just by going to a graveyard. Before I come on to Ayatollah Bahauddin, I want to tell you a story. There was a very famous scholar by the name of Sheikh Muhammad Taqi Amuli. He was a philosopher, but he was also the student of Qadi Marhum. So one day he was walking with Qadi into Wadi al-Salam. And he sees, Qadi is spending 45 minutes there. So he's thinking in his mind. He's thinking, why does my teacher come, sits here for 45 minutes? Just recite a Fatiha and go. There's not enough time in the day. He should go back, he should study, whatever it may be. He was thinking this. But he left it, he didn't say anything to Qadi. That night he went home. And he was thinking to himself, should I return back to Qum, to Iran, or should I stay in Najaf? And as he was thinking that, he went to lie down. And as he was lying down, in front of him were books. He says, should I stick my foot towards the books or should I not stick my foot to it? And he was thinking, not thinking, he said, well, what difference does it make? My intention isn't to disrespect the books. He says, in the morning I got up, I went to the lesson of Qadi. Qadi was sitting there. He said to me, you did disrespect the books. You should have moved your feet away. And by the way, you going to Iran is not good. You should stay in Najaf. So he looked up and he said, how do you know? He said, because of Wadi al-Salam. Wadi al-Salam, or going to a graveyard, praying for those people who have died, opens up the barzakhi eye in a person. This is why Shias have been recommended that at least on a weekly basis, even if it's for 2 minutes, go to the graveyard and recite a Fatiha. Why? Because the graveyard helps you. It's that place, reality, which is the closest to Alam and Malakut. It opens the eye of the believer to a different reality. And this is why they say that if ever a human being falls into problems, And as you know, you go to your parents, right, to ask them to pray for you. But if your parents are not alive, the tradition says between the time of Dhuhr on a Thursday and before Dhuhr on a Friday, this 24-hour window is important. Go to the grave of your parents and recite Yasin. So the question is asked. But for example, my parents are buried in Karachi. My parents are buried in Dar es Salaam. My parents are buried in Mumbai. What do I do? Here the option is there as well. Go to the graveyard of the Muslims. So go to Houston somewhere where there's a graveyard. Tell me, but we don't have a graveyard in Houston. What do we do? Okay, you don't have a graveyard? Let me give you another solution. Go to your back lawn, garden, make a line, think, give nisbah to the fact that this is the grave of your mother, recite Yasin. You know what happens? Look at the tradition. A mother raises her hands, says, my son is in problems, Allah. What can I do? I've died, but I'm still his mother. Help him. Help him. You know, when you come here to the majlis, do you know the arwah of your deceased parents also come here? Your grandparents also come here. What are they looking for? They're saying, look, son, I took you to the majlis of Hussein. Even when I was sick, when it was hot, I took you. When it was cold, I took you. When I was feeling unwell, I took you. Now, my A'mal book is closed. When you go to the majlis, at least one tear dedicated for me. One tear, that's it. Dedicate one tear to me. Look, there's a lot to say. And my time is coming to an end. If I open up something now, we'll go 15 minutes. But I want to ask you a question. All of you. You sit here today. Sahib-e-Azaz, your Imam, right? But can you imagine one thing? Have you ever seen, and you must have done, when somebody passes away, the waratha, when you stand there, you hug them. You give condolences to them. And the purpose of it is because it softens their heart. Today, if you can imagine, 1400 years later, your Imam has no one to give him condolences. He has no one to hold him, to hug him. Ghaibat is not an easy place. If you think that your Imam has it easy, the entire weight of the world is on his shoulders. This is why Dhuhr is better for him, because Allah gives him respite. Otherwise, imagine the spiritual exercises he has to do, breaks his back. And the Imam, all of that restriction because of us. He's your Imam. Until you don't get to the mark of calling him back, he's in ghaibah. This is why Imam not coming sometimes is actually because of our own deeds. We're indirectly causing him pain. But you look at him, in the words of that great scholar, he says, when I went to Samara and went to the Sardab, I saw a man in sajda, tears coming out of his eyes. All he was saying was, Allah forgive them. Allah forgive my Shia. Allah forgive them. And if they've wronged me, I forgive them. And Allah, if they've wronged you, please forgive them for my behalf. Imagine, this is your Imam. Allah knows where he is tonight. Maybe he's in Najaf, under the golden dome of the Imam. Look at Samara and see. There was a bomb blast 15, 16 years ago. You built it back. You go to Karbala. You see the gold and the domes there. The Ayatollah Sistani always says, don't look at the gold. No, the body is still broken. The fact is the Shias who are there. Sometimes I think to myself, whichever haram you go to, your Imams are lying there in some form of peace and people are visiting. But that one mother who sacrificed everything for her children, to this day, there's not even a grave for her. And there's not even a lantern next to her grave. There's still darkness over there. Still darkness over there. Imagine, look at, that's the love of a mother's heart. She sacrifices everything so that people can go to her children. Now let me ask you a question. That broken-hearted mother, is there anyone today to visit her grave? Imagine. Today when you go to Medina, you don't even know where she is. Darkness. That's all it is. They used to say that one day Imam Sajjad was sitting there. As he was sitting there, before Minhal could come to him, he got up and began to walk. He walked into a garden. When Minhal came to his house, Khadim said, Minhal, Imam's gone to the garden. Minhal felt happy. He said, finally my Mawla has stopped crying and he's gone to the garden. But when he went to the garden, you saw that Imam was crying on the top of his voice. He was saying, Wa Husayna, Wa Mazluma. So Imam, as he was crying, Minhal goes to him. He says, Mawla, I thought you may have come to the garden for a break. Why are you crying for? He says, Minhal, what could I do? When I saw the flowing water, I remembered my Sakina was thirsty. I remembered my father on the final day when he came to me and he whispered to me. He said, tell my Shia, whenever you drink cold water, remember this Hussein. And tell them, if only you were here to watch me, how I took my baby and that enemy didn't show any rahmah to my 6-month-old baby. Minhal at that time begins to cry. He asked Mawla a question. He says, Mawla, you miss Sakina. What do you miss about Sakina? You know what he replied? He said, the one thing I miss about her is that when my arms were tied behind my back and my chains were burning me, the spikes were going into my neck, it was burning me. It was hurting me. I was saying, my sister was thirsty. The water that she had, she bought the water, she didn't drink it. She poured it over my chains. I said, Sakina, why don't you drink? She says, brother, I can't see you saying like this. Allah never show you a moment where your 4-year-old girl is in that situation. Masuma, right? What is a masoom person? A masoom person, children look at them and say, that lady, that girl who was waiting for at least somebody to give her condolences, where does the condolences come? Look, I wouldn't even have said this if this wasn't a reality. When Ayatollah Mohsen Amina Amali went to remove the water from the grave of Sakina, if you can take this, I'll tell you. There was a picture that was taken. I've seen that picture. I have a copy of that picture. There was a white shroud. Mohsen Amina Amali is sitting there. There was an elder there who narrated this to me. He said, I went to Mohsen Amina Amali and I asked him a question. Did you see Sakina? He said, I did, but the way that I saw her breaks my heart. Says, what did you see? He said, I saw 3 finger marks on her face and there was hair missing from her head. I could see Shimmer would grab her by the hair and pull her in such a way. 1400 years later, there's 3 finger marks still on the face of Sakina. Now ask, why does your Moulana Sajjad miss Sakina? Minhal asks again, he says, Mawla, why do you miss Sakina? You know what now the reply is? The reply is this: when Shimmer made me walk over thorny bushes, I used to have blisters. The thorns went into my blister. One day I was stretching my leg. My sister came to me. She looked at me and she said, brother, I've never seen you stretch your leg out like this. He says, Sakina, what can I do? I have thorns in my feet. He said, my young sister went with her small hands. She pulled out every single thorn. But what could I do? When Shimmer made Sakina walk over thorny bushes, my arms were tied behind my back. I couldn't pull out those thorns. 9th of Muharram comes. Army upon army is coming. Sayyidah Zainab's heart is breaking. She's asking, why are they coming? For my blood. Why are they coming? For my blood. Why are they coming? For my blood. Eventually a time comes, she looks up and she says, but brother, don't we have anyone to come for us? Says, yes. My friend is coming. My friend is coming. Which friend? That friend who Rasulullah hugged. They say that this small boy who's known as Habib ibn Madahir, hadith is there, one day Rasulullah is walking in the streets of Medina. He sees a small boy. He goes and hugs him. Sahaba come. They ask, why are you hugging this boy for? He says, you don't understand. He loves my Hussein, that whenever Hussein walks, he picks the khak up and he puts it in his head. He says, this will be that boy who's going to come to defend my son when he's all alone and he's gharib. What happens? Habib is sitting there. Imam is given the hukum. When you're sitting on risk, don't get up, Habib. Unless if you're Imam of the time. As he's sitting there, a person comes outside, gives a voice, knocks on the door. Ana baridul Hussein. Habib gets up, walks to the door, looks at the letter, kisses the letter, looks at it and sees, إلى رجل فقيه حبيب ibn Madahir min Hussein ibn al-Zahra. Imam Hussein only wrote that when he wanted Habib's passion to come out. You know what it says? It says, Habib, we're stranded amongst our enemies. Enemies all round. Habib, if you can come to my help, come. Ajilan, come quickly, Habib. Habib takes the letter, comes inside, wants to test his wife. She asks him, what is it? He said, it's a letter from Hussein. What does Hussein want? Says that Hussein is gharib, wahid, adshan, madloom, surrounded. Habib, what are you waiting for? He says, I'm thinking, what's going to happen to you after me? She says, you give me your sword, I'll go, Habib. Habib gets up and says, no, I was just testing you. Just testing you. So he says one thing. He looks up at a servant. He says, oh servant, Kufa is a very bad place at the moment. Go next to the border of Kufa, wait with me. Wait for me with my horse. In the meanwhile, as Habib is coming, who comes? Muslim bin Awsaja. Muslim looks up. He says, Habib, where are you going? He says, I'm going to Jannah. He says, where? He says, I'm going to Hussein. He says, what's happened? He says, don't you know? Hussein is surrounded. He says, if you're going, take me as well. Hadith says, Habib was a little late. As he got there, Habib begins to cry. Why does he cry? He looks up. He sees the slave is having a conversation with the horse. And the slave is saying that, oh horse, if my master doesn't come, then I'm going to get on top of you and I'm going to ride to save Hussein. Habib looks up towards Karbala and says, Assalamu alayka, Ya Abdullah. What day has come when this servant of mine, this slave of mine has ghayr over you, Hussein? Habib gets on the horse, begins to ride, gets to Karbala. Famous tradition, right? As he comes there, the first thing Habib does is what? Comes towards Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein comes forward and says, he says, my sister Zainab gives salam to you, Habib. Habib takes off his amama, chucks it on the ground, rubs the dirt in his hair, falls to the ground. He says, Mola, how gharib are you that your sisters are here? But how more gharib it is that the daughter of Zahra is giving salam to this slave. 9th of Muharram comes. Habib is listening. Zainab is talking to Sayyidah Zainab is talking to Imam Hussein. She says, brother, Rasulullah's Sahabi in Uhud left him. Our father Ali's companions in the Battle of Siffin. Our brother Hassan. How do you know that your companion is not going to leave you? They say Habib couldn't take it. He comes back to the tent of Ashab-e Hussein. He says, Ashab-e Hussein, Bint Rasulullah doubts us. Let's all go and show her how loyal we are. What happens? Comes out. All of the companions were there. All of the swords were out. Says, give us the hukum and our necks will be on your feet. You know what the tradition says? Final thing is this. Day of Ashura comes. Muslim bin Osajah was an old man. Imam Hussein asks him something. Muslim bin Osajah insists on Imam Hussein, Mawla, I want to go and do jihad. I'm not old. I can fight. He was old. He wears a qamar band, puts his eyes back, straightens his back. He says, Mawla, I want to go and fight. Imam Hussein knew this is not for him. But he said, look, if you want to do something, we're going to pray. You defend us. You defend us. You know the tradition says? Imam Hussein says, Allahu Akbar. Muslim puts his chest out. Arrow comes. Takes one arrow in his chest. Second arrow goes into his chest. He's holding himself and he's praying. Allah, don't let me fall now. My Mawla is praying. Arrow upon arrow upon arrow. Imam Hussein is praying. Final salam comes. Allahu Akbar. Muslim falls. As he begins to fall, Imam looks up. Imam sees him, falls on his feet. Muslim looks up and says, Mawla, just tell me one thing. Are you happy with me? Reply comes, I'm happy. My mother is happy. He says, but listen, I just want to give one wasiyah. Who was standing there? Habib ibn Mudahir. He says, Habib, I want to give one wasiyah, though I know you won't live either, and I know I'm not going to live anymore. What does he say? He says, Usikum bihadha. He says, Muslim, Habib, don't leave Hussein. Look, nor can I recite anymore, nor can you listen anymore. But because there are many people who have asked for dua, I want to just give one wasila. All of you pray. Duas become accepted here. This is the time where dua becomes accepted. Just remember, Allah, for the sake of that time. Look, Habib saw Imam Hussein. Muslims saw Imam Hussein. But as you know, all of the companions of Imam Hussein went. In the tradition it says this. It says the night time when Sham-e-Ghariba fell, the biggest dhulm that made Imam Hussein's body shake was that slap on the face of Sakina that was so hard that 40 days later, when the head of Imam Hussein comes to Sakina, Sakina just says one thing. She says, Father, forgive me that I stutter in my speech when I speak to you. When Shimmer slapped me on the face, it was so hard that from that day onwards, every time I try and speak, I stutter in my speech. Matam Hussein.
Say, y'all 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 say,
مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، حالت سجدہ میں ہے بے کس مجبور بھی ہے اور کئی روزے کا پیاسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، بولی زینب ظلم شبیر پہ ڈھانے والوں، پتھروں کے تلے میت کو چھپانے والوں، ہائے کاندھے پہ اٹھاتے تھے جنہیں خط میں رسول، میرے اس بھائی کا لاشا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، جس کا غازی نہ رہا اور علی اکبر نہ بچا، بھائی کی لاش پہ کھل کے جس رونے نہ دیا، آج ماتم سارے بازار جو ہم کہتے ہیں، اسی زینب کا دلاسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، سیدوں کا بھارا دربار جلایا کیوں ہے، بیویوں کو سارے بازار پھرایا کیوں ہے، تو نے تو یہ بھی نہ سوچا کہ جو قیدی ہے بنے پاک زہرا کا اثاثہ ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا ہے یہ، اے مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا میں ہوں زینب مجھے دے تو سمجھتا کیوں ہے سن کے خطبہ میرا ملعون بگڑتا کیوں ہے بولی زینب کہ یہ خطبہ ہی نہیں سنے اے یزید پاک قرآن کا خلاصہ ہے یہ مسلمان کاش سوچا ہوتا کہ محمد کا نواسا
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ